For those of you who don't know me, my name's John Hamer, and apparently I'm a conspiracy theorist. So yeah, I've been researching this kind of stuff for maybe 27 years, just a short while. And this particular topic came to my attention a few years ago, and when I looked into it, it blew me away basically, because we've all been conditioned from being school age, haven't we? That we're constantly living under this nuclear threat, and it's coming back again at the moment, isn't it? With all the talk of World War III in the air, it's not going to happen. Don't worry. It's all bollocks, total bollocks, and I'm going to prove it to you in the next hour or so. So yeah, if you're all sitting comfortably and eagerly anticipating this talk, then off we go. Yeah. So yeah, as I said, I've been doing this for 27 years. My background was IT, but I finished my career in IT about 25 years ago. So and since then, I've done absolutely nothing. Other than write a few books and do a few talks and a bit of research. So yeah, we're going to talk about the great nuclear weapons hoax. Is there anyone that actually believes that they exist? Good. Going to be a hard night. Okay. Well, before we get into the presentation proper, I'm going to talk a little bit about conspiracies in general and the falsification of history and science, how it's been a part of our lives for so long. Start off with a few quotes. Now, can everybody read the slides at the back? Yes. You're okay. I'll read it anyway. Okay. It says, where I come from, we believe lots of things that aren't true. We call it history. And this actually came to light, this quote. Anybody seen the musical Wicked? Yeah. Yeah, well, okay. This actually came from the musical Wicked, believe it or not. And this was a line by The Wizard of Oz, because Wicked is, for those of you not aware, is a prequel to The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so it's like all the events leading up to the story of Wizard of Oz. And that was a quote from The Wizard of Oz. Okay, so another quote here. History is more or less bunk. Henry Ford, the car man, obviously. And history is a lie, commonly agreed upon. That was from the French philosopher Voltaire. All truisms, these, by the way. And then some guy by the name of John Hammer, who wrote a best-selling book called The Falsification of History in 2012. And he said, almost everything you think you know about history and science is totally wrong. And tonight, this is just one element of that, and that's what we're going to be talking about. Because history's been falsified for millennia, literally millennia. That's not an exaggeration, it's not hyperbole. It's been falsified for millennia. Why? To benefit those in power and further their insidious agendas. And I don't mean governments by those in power. I'm sure you're all aware of this, but I mean those with the real power, those entities who sit above our governments and dictate their policies. Politicians are simply puppets, glove puppets, dancing to the tune of this unseen band who sit in the shadows above them or behind them. Interesting quote here from a French author called Honoré de Balzac. There's two world histories. One is the official and full of lies, destined to be taught in schools. The other is a secret history which harbours the true causes and occurrences. Okay. So yeah, conspiracy theories. Apparently, as I said earlier, I'm just a conspiracy theorist. I wish I'd had £1 for every time someone had called me that. Yeah, so what is a conspiracy theory? Again, I'm sure you're aware, but don't forget that sometimes I talk to audiences where they're not as aware, maybe as you guys. So I do kind of put this stuff in at the beginning just to clarify a few things. It was actually coined by the CIA in the aftermath of the JFK assassination, because at that time people were questioning the findings of the Warren Report, which was the official look into exactly what happened, which again was a load of nonsense, you know. But to counteract that, the CIA came up with the phrase conspiracy theorist or conspiracy theory in order to denigrate people who actually questioned the agenda. Okay. So it's obviously now used to discredit anybody who tries to expose the lies of our would-be controllers. That says, obviously, did you know? The term conspiracy theorist, and it's just reiterating what I've just said, it actually appeared in a memo called Countering Criticism of the Warren Report, and the CIA set out to make that a weapon to be used against anyone who questioned the government's secret activities and programs. But having said all that, I always say this in my talks, I don't want you to take what I'm saying as gospel. I want you to question absolutely everything. Don't believe me. You look it up for yourself and you'll find it. So, you know, just to summarize that, I don't want you to think like me. I just want you to think. It's extremely important. There's a great quote here from one of my early heroes, Bill Cooper, who wrote a fantastic book called Behold a Pale Horse, if any of you have ever read that. If you haven't, I would recommend that you do. He wrote it in the 90s, early 90s. And Bill was assassinated by the FBI on his own doorstep. The reason he was assassinated was because he predicted 9/11 2 months before it happened. Bill had been a high-ranking naval officer, so he was kind of privy to lots of information. And he said, I don't advise you what you should believe or not believe, but I do advise you that we all need to learn as much as we can about everything we can, because one thing I've learned in my life is that most of what we've ever been taught has been a lie. Well said, Bill. No, after. About 6 weeks after, I think. Oh, sorry, I just forgot to mention, could everyone switch the phones off, make sure the phones are on silent? Well, because it's quite distracting if they go off, that's all. Okay. And I think it's true to say that most people don't really want to hear the truth. They just want constant reassurance that what they believe is the truth. And that is very true in itself. And a gentleman by the name of Nikola Tesla, I'm sure you've all heard of, he said today, scientists have substituted mathematics for experiments, and they wander off through equation after equation, and eventually build a structure which has no relation to reality. Again, very, very true. People ask me where I get my research from. This is a common question that I get. Well, I'll tell you, as soon as you ask so nicely. First of all, I have an extensive book collection, some of which are well over 100 years old. And the thing about that is that I've found from experience that the older the book, the more likely you are to find the truth within it. Why would that be, John? I hear you ask. And that is because they're constantly refining their agenda and changing history to suit their own version of the truth, or version of the past, just as Orwell told us about in 1984. It's exactly like that. So they're refining that truth all the time. So the older the book, consequently, the more likely the stuff in that is to be true. It's not 100% true, but it's certainly more true than you would find in today's books. And also, I get a lot of my information from this very handy little book. I would recommend you all get a copy because it's very revealing. Yeah, it says under here, we couldn't do what we do if we didn't have the corrupt British media supporting us. Absolutely. Yeah, so a little meme here about the myth of atomic weapons. I'll read it out because that is pretty small, unless you've all got absolutely 2020 vision. It says, A-bombs were invented by science fiction writer H.G. Wells. The top secret Manhattan Project was a work of fantasy and scaremongering propaganda. Surely not. The nuclear war hoax was used to siphon money and end World War II. Evidence proves that the USA dropped napalm carpet firebombs on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Nukes don't exist. They're a technological impossibility. It's absolutely true. Compressing uranium metal to double density with a neutron in between to ignite an uncontrolled explosion is fiction. And we're going to see that in action over the next hour. So yeah, nuclear weapons do not exist. It is, in fact, a 20th century hoax. Yeah, so, big question. Why would they lie to us about nuclear weapons? Why? The $64,000 question. Well, we'll see. We'll see. Okay. So let's first of all look at the history of nuclear weapons. Yeah, most of my generation, the so-called baby boomers, those that were born in the 10, 15 years following World War II. I know you don't. You couldn't possibly believe that looking at me. I know, but yeah. It was an ever-present threat in our lives. I was just talking to a young lady there who was the same age as me, and I don't know about you, but we had it drilled into us at school constantly. We were having nuclear drills, even at primary school, where we were told to hide under the desk when the siren went off, and we had these drills, and everybody was terrified, absolutely terrified. And we were told that civilization is hanging by a thread with, these crazy men with their fingers on the nuclear trigger, and, the whole world could disappear in a flash when we're least expecting it. Why? Well, let's see. If you had to give one word, the reason for what we're talking about tonight, the nuclear weapons hoax, that would be number one. Because fear, again, I'm sure you're all aware of this, it's a weapon, a very powerful weapon that they use to keep populations in line. And it's extremely powerful as a tool of manipulation, because our controllers realize that if they create a situation to make us fearful, and I'm sure we've all experienced that in the last few years with a certain event that went on for 2 years, it makes us much more malleable, easier to manipulate, because the human nature is to seek sanctuary. So they offer that sanctuary to us in the form of a vaccine, in the case of what happened a couple of years ago, but in other ways too. And it's a favourite technique used by the few to control the many, because they realise that one of the only ways of a few thousand people controlling the alleged 8 billion of us is to create this fearful environment. If you notice, we just lurch from one crisis to another. All through the 20th century, it was World War I, the Russian Revolution, World War II, the rise of Nazism. That's another story for another day. The Korean War, the Vietnam War, terrorism reared its ugly head. It's just a constant drip feeding of stuff to make us scared. And that's how they control us, or partly how they control us. And as I said, a fearful population is far, far easier to control. Just take a drink of my cherry juice. Honest. Yeah. It's better. So, that's what I've just said. Obviously preempted myself there. There you go. So yeah, after World War II, they needed a new threat. So while World War II was going on, they devised something called the atomic program. And this was designed because they already knew probably even before World War II started, that following World War II, which they knew they would have to end at some point, much to their disappointment, of course, because if they could, they would have just carried it on ad infinitum, that they needed a new threat. And that new threat was the Cold War, with Russia and America with their fingers on the nuclear triggers. Are we in? Are we in? Yeah, good. And so, yeah, and what followed immediately after the Cold War ended? Terrorism. Ooh, fear. And then post-terrorism, the pandemic. Have you noticed how during that alleged pandemic there was no terrorism whatsoever? It was never even mentioned. Funny that, wasn't it? Yeah, that'd be it, yeah. So yeah, for well over 100 years, probably much longer than that, they've been practicing the dark art of control over the ever-increasing population. And of course, all those fearful episodes, major ones, were liberally interspersed with lots of other less significant episodes and false flag attacks, all that kind of stuff, all designed to lower our vibrations and make us fearful. Because the fearful people are easier to control. And they're constantly dreaming up new ways to keep us in fear. I wonder what will be next. And they do this because they know how the human psyche works. They are masters of the human psyche. They know exactly which buttons to press. They know exactly which levers to pull to mold us into the population that they want. Okay, so there you go. And of course, living in fear, just to keep reiterating the point because it's so important, it's something that our governments and their controllers love to afflict upon us, and it's just one of the many ways that they're able to control the many. Whether it's the overt threat of imminent nuclear annihilation, Muslim terrorism coming to our doorsteps, being wiped out in a pandemic, or by deranged, gun-wielding murderers on the rampage. Our governments have a ready-made, off-the-shelf nemesis just to ensure that we all have something, anything at all, to be frightened of. So I think we've finished labouring that particular point now. Right. Now, getting into the meat of it now. Just after the war, there was a guy called Alexander Dsersky who was a US major in the American Army, and he was commissioned by the US Department of Defense immediately following World War II, and he was commissioned to conduct a survey post-World War II of all the bomb-damaged cities in the world. Okay, he spent a year, 18 months travelling all around them, and he analysed all the different types of bomb damage, from just conventional bombs, incendiary bombs, napalm, and of course the 2 nuclear attacks on Japan, allegedly. And he was obviously commissioned by the army itself, and he was commissioned because they wanted to analyse which kinds of bombs were most effective and the resultant havoc that they all would cause. So that's why that's why it was done. In other words, to determine which bombing strategies were most effective. So he spent about 18 months going around every single war zone in the world and analysing the data that he collected. Now, the principal alleged verifiable evidence for nukes is, of course, the only time they've ever been used in anger, and that is those 2 Japanese cities. But Dsersky, he made an extensive investigation into the damage in both cities, along with all the other bombed cities throughout the world. And what he found at first confused him. Then it absolutely stunned him. What did he find, John? I don't know. Let's see. he couldn't detect any differences whatsoever between those two cities and any other conventionally bombed cities in Japan or Europe. None. He was prepared, when he went over there, he was prepared for horrific sights, but found nothing worse than any other devastated city throughout the world. Mainly Japan and Germany, because they were the two that got the real brunt of it. I know London was bombed and one or two other cities, but it was nothing compared to what happened to Germany and Japan. So yeah, he saw no difference whatsoever. And in Hiroshima and Nagasaki, all the metal frame buildings were still intact. But an interesting thing about Hiroshima and Nagasaki, they were totally untouched. Every other Japanese city, by the time of the nuclear attacks, they'd be virtually razed to the ground. Every other Japanese city was virtually obliterated. Yet Hiroshima and Nagasaki had never been attacked at all, in any way. And in addition to that, both those two cities, 90% of the buildings there were wood. You see where this is going now? They wanted to save those two cities to create the maximum impact when they announced that they'd been nuked. And they knew that carpet bombing them with napalm would produce the desired effect. The few brick-built buildings that there were in those two cities were still intact. And the main hospital in Hiroshima, which was less than a mile from the alleged epicenter of the nuclear blast, it was still intact. Doesn't compute, does it? Nobody was killed in the hospital. It was full. Nobody was killed, apart from a few slight injuries, which were mainly caused by flying glass and not the blast, as you would expect with a nuclear explosion. Now, here's a quote. It's a long one, so I'm going to read it out because it's quite small. This is from Seversky himself, Major Alexander Seversky. He said, as special consultant to the Secretary of War, Robert P. Patterson, I spent nearly 8 months intensively studying war destruction in Europe and Asia. I became thoroughly familiar with every variety of damage, from high explosives, incendiaries, artillery shells, dynamite, and combinations of these. In this study, I inspected Hiroshima and Nagasaki, the targets of our atom bomb, examining the ruins, interrogating eyewitnesses, and taking hundreds of pictures. It was my considered opinion, I told correspondents in Tokyo, that the effects of the atom bombs, not of future bombs, but of these two, had been wildly exaggerated. If dropped on New York or Chicago, one of those bombs would have done no more damage than a 10-ton blockbuster. And the results in Hiroshima and Nagasaki could have been achieved by about 200 B-29s loaded with incendiaries, except that fewer Japanese would have been killed. I did not underrate atom bombs or dispute their future potential. I merely conveyed my professional findings on the physical results of the two bombs, and they happened to be in startling contrast to the hysterical, imaginative versions spread through the world. And that continues. My findings were pounced on in outraged anger, unsurprisingly, by all sorts of people, in the press, on the air, at public forums, and by scientists who haven't been within 5,000 miles of Hiroshima. But the violence of this reaction cannot alter the facts on view in the two Japanese cities. I began my study of Japan by flying over Yokohama, Nagoya, Osaka, Kobe, and dozens of other places. Later, I visited them all on foot. All presented the same pattern. The bombed areas looked pinkish, an effect produced by the piles of ashes and rubble mixed with rusted metal. Modern buildings and factories still stood. That many of the buildings were gutted by fire was not apparent from the air. The centre of Yokohama, for instance, seemed almost intact when viewed from an airplane. The long industrial belt stretching from Osaka to Kobe had been laid waste by fire, but the factories and other concrete structures were still standing. On the whole, it was a picture quite different from what I had seen in German cities subjected to demolition bombardment. The difference lay in the fact that Japanese destruction was overwhelmingly incendiary, with comparatively little structural damage to inflammable targets. And this is the last one, I think. Yeah. In Hiroshima, I was prepared for radically different sights, but to my surprise, Hiroshima looked exactly like all the other burned out cities in Japan. There was a familiar pink blot about 2 miles in diameter. It was dotted with charred trees and telephone poles. Only one of the city's 20 bridges was down. Hiroshima's clusters of modern buildings in the downtown section stood upright. Somebody tapping the feet because the screen's moving up and down. Is it you? It was obvious that the blast could not have been so powerful as we're being led to believe. It was an extensive blast rather than intensive. I had heard of buildings instantly consumed by unprecedented heat, yet here I saw the building structurally intact and, what is more, topped by undamaged flagpoles, lightning rods, painted railings, air raid precaution signs, and other comparatively fragile objects. At the T-bridge, which was the aiming point for the atomic bomb, I looked for the bolt spot where everything had presumably been vaporized in the twinkling of an eye. It wasn't there or anywhere else. I could find no traces of an unusual phenomena. What I did see was in substance a replica of Yokohama or Osaka or the Tokyo suburbs, the familiar residue of an area of wood and brick houses razed by uncontrollable fire. Everywhere I saw the trunks of charred and leafless trees, burned and unburnt chunks of wood. The fire had been intense enough to bend and twist steel girders and to melt glass until it ran like lava, just as in other Japanese cities. Does that not sound very strange to you? Just to me. Certainly just to me. If we're to believe in this nuclear myth. Isn't it totally contradictory to what we've been told about Hiroshima and Nagasaki? The damage to both cities was totally consistent with extreme firebombing. There was no justification, in other words, turning stone to dust, or melted metals at all. And as I said before, the main hospital, less than 1 mile from the alleged epicenter, was still intact. No one was killed, and there were only a few slight injuries, mainly from flying glass. And that is a picture coming up. That's the hospital in the top background. Okay, so concrete building, intact, virtually. Now, this is an interesting quote from an American POW in Japan. It doesn't prove anything as per se, but it's interesting nevertheless, because this is kind of a contemporary view of what had been going on. And he said, "We aren't really sure what's happened. We're happy about the war ending, but I don't think everyone really believes this thing about the atom bomb. I think it might be some kind of propaganda device that gives the Japanese a good excuse to surrender. Perhaps the Japanese said we dropped an atomic bomb and we're just going along with it." Interesting viewpoint. So what did Dostoevsky conclude? That in reality the damage was a result of carpet incendiary bombing, as with all the other Japanese cities. And as I said earlier, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were strangely not attacked at all until the nuclear attacks. Whereas 95% of all the other Japanese cities were virtually razed to the ground. And again, to repeat what I said before, Hiroshima and Nagasaki were both 90% plus wooden construction. And secret US documents, US government documents, actually prove it was firebombed and not nuked. So there's no question, there's no dispute here. This is absolutely the case. Hiroshima was simply carpet bombed along with all the other Japanese cities. As I said, I didn't say, but Hiroshima and Nagasaki had no strategic military value whatsoever. That's why they'd not been bombed, or partly why they'd not been bombed. But the other reason was because they needed to keep them intact for maximum impact when they pulled off the nuclear explosions hoax. As I said, serving the purpose of eliciting maximum propaganda from a fake nuclear attack. Now, stop me if you've heard this kind of thing before, but death figures in the Hiroshima Bomb Museum are self-admittedly inclusive of anyone who was in the area at that time and died subsequently, regardless of the actual cause. So, something ringing a bell in my head about that. Can't quite place what it is. Yeah. So yeah, where have we heard that before? And now Dostoevsky also stated that one of these nuclear weapons, if dropped on New York, would have caused insignificant amounts of damage, or relatively insignificant amounts of damage. Now, a short history lesson here, for those of you unaware of the, exactly what happened towards the end of the war when America was battering Japan to death, and Japan actually ended up surrendering. Japan, believe it or not, had actually been trying to negotiate surrender terms for over a year before the atomic attacks, but the US kept refusing. Why did they keep refusing? Because they wanted to get maximum propaganda value from the nuclear attacks. They'd already got these plans to obliterate those two cities. And then this would, as I mentioned earlier, that would then facilitate the Cold War because it had been planned well in advance. Okay, I'm not going to go into that, the background to it. Just trust me, that is the case. And by all means, feel free to do your own research. You will find that I'm telling the truth. So the bomb was ready, allegedly, by mid-1945. But if it had been ready too soon, then the war would have ended prematurely, as far as they were concerned. And that was definitely not part of their agenda. They wanted to make maximum capital from continuing the war, so that's exactly what they did. And of course, nuclear weapons technology is allegedly a closely guarded secret. Of course it is. And they tell us that nuclear weapons work by compressing two solid pieces of metal together, which causes them to explode. Okay. There's no scientific evidence whatsoever that explosive fission exists, except within these highly suspect secret military documents. And real scientists, by that I mean ones that are not bought into the agenda and actually do some proper research and speak proper truth, not like 99% of the rest of them, they do confirm that it is totally impossible and against the law of physics to boot. And interestingly again, there's currently a $1 million prize available on the internet to anyone who can prove that nuclear weapons exist. It's never been claimed. So the gentleman at the back there who believes in it, go for it. Go for it. Fair enough. I'm only teasing, by the way. It's never been successfully claimed, as I said. Now, this is an interesting quote. Our entire post-war program depends on terrifying the world with the atomic bomb. This is a genuine quote. We are hoping for a tally of 1 million dead in Japan. I mean, how horrific. We are hoping for a tally of 1 million dead in Japan. But if they surrender, we won't have anything. That's why they won't let them surrender, because they were preparing the bomb, or the fake bomb. And this was from the US Secretary of State at the time. His name was Edward Stettinius Jr., who was the son of a J.P. Morgan partner. Jolly good. And I think that does tell us all we need to know about the real intentions behind the attacks. So let's look a little bit about nuclear weapons tests. Because other than the actual alleged Hiroshima and Nagasaki attacks, there are no other examples of nuclear weapons being exploded except in a test situation. I'll tell you now, they're all fake, every single one of them. And I'm going to show you a few pictures in a moment to prove it. Hello. Speak to me. Yeah, so it's easy to prove that they're all fake. I can't show you every single picture, by the way, but I'll show you a good selection of them. Now, my co-author on this book, Welcome to the Masquerade, which is absolutely nothing to do with the the nuclear hoax, but everything to do with the COVID scam. My co-author on that, Shannon, she was an ex-professional photographer, and she's somewhat of a photographic expert, and she has examined hundreds of pictures of nuclear tests, and according to her, and she's no reason to lie about it. She said they're all fake, every single one of them. I'm going to show you a few in a few minutes. Yeah, she examined them, lots of photos of these so-called nuclear attacks and tests. And actually, that's a very good point. There's actually a lot less in existence than you may think. You might think there's hundreds of them, or whatever, I don't know. But there's not that many, not as many as you would expect. And every single one is fake without question. So we'll look at that in more detail shortly. Some very odd facts regarding the initial tests. The Trinity test, which was the first test of the atomic bomb ever, was a plutonium bomb, or as was the Nagasaki bomb, which was the second attack, by the way. Nagasaki. Hiroshima was first, and that was named Fat Man, that particular bomb. Why they had to give them names, your guess is as good as mine, other than to make it stick in the public mind, I guess. Yet the Hiroshima bomb, Little Boy it was called, which was the first one, was a uranium bomb, and it was never tested at all then. Incredible, that, isn't it? This is all true, by the way. You know, you can check the facts. Why would they use the untested one first, or even at all? Doesn't make sense, does it? But of course, the whole thing's nonsense anyway, as we know. In fact, all the specifications, calculations, diagrams, and science behind Little Boy were immediately destroyed after Hiroshima. Now again, stop me if you've heard of a similar instance more recently. Not that much more recently, but I'm thinking specifically of the moon landings, where I don't know whether you're all aware, but after the event, all the scientific and technical specifications and data were all destroyed. They said they were lost. They said they were lost. Yeah, right. Yeah, it's easy to lose 750 cartons of tapes and data, isn't it? Yeah. Oh gosh, where do we put them? Yeah, it's supposedly the greatest ever, mankind achievement in mankind's history, getting a man to the moon. And by the way, I've just lost all the data. Oh shit. No backup. No. Oh, in fact, they actually said that they'd overwritten the tapes. They said, I saw a quote from an NASA spokesman, and he said, well, in the late 70s, there was a shortage of videotapes, so we had to reuse them. Yeah. So yeah, stop me if you've heard that story before. So those photos. How easy is it to make it look like nuclear devastation? Okay. I'm going to have to point on this. So that's a typical nuclear test from the 1950s. It doesn't actually show up very clearly. It's much more clear on the screen, actually. What's wrong with that picture? There are so many things wrong with it. So, firstly, what is the light source for that picture? Surely, it would be the explosion itself. It has to be the explosion itself, because it would generate a lot of light. So why do we get this effect down here? Surely the whole picture would just be a blinding flash of light. No way could that happen. It's just a physical impossibility. And that was something that Shannon pointed out to me, which is true. There's no surge in the sea. Okay, this is the sea here. There's no surge at all. That was obviously taken a second or two after the actual explosion. You get this massive plume going upwards, but there's no surge in the sea. By the way, that you might think that is the surge there. That's the atoll in which it was exploded. So that's not a surge. There's no sea surge. And yeah, the semicircular whitish line is the atoll. And the little clouds all dotted around here, here. Do you really think that they'd be still standing? Do you think they'd be still there? After what we're told about nuclear blasts and how powerful they are, it would have just immediately obliterated them. The surge from the blast itself, the shockwave from the blast itself would have blown them to smithereens, or at least blown them well out of the picture. Total fake. Okay, now another one. This is another interesting one. This is actually the Trinity nuclear test, which is more fakery. Now, this allegedly, they tell us, took place at 4:30 a.m. in the New Mexico desert. But I actually checked the time of the sunrise in New Mexico in that date in 1945. And the sunrise on that morning was actually 6:30. But that's apparently 4:30, they tell us. Now, this was allegedly 20 kilotons. But looks pretty feeble for me for 20 kilotons. And I'll show you the next picture, which will make you think exactly the same. Right. The next one was 23 kilotons. And I'll show you that in a minute. Now, what's interesting about these, again, where do you think the light source would have been? Would have been from the explosion itself. Look at the shadows. The light source is over there. That is an early attempt at CGI, and not a very good one. Now that is a 23 kiloton explosion. So it's only 3 kilotons difference, they tell us. And again, significantly more powerful looking than the previous one, but only 3 kilotons. Again, there's no sea surge at all. This is the sea here. That would have been a massive tidal wave or a mini tidal wave. And again, the trees, they would have been obliterated. Totally obliterated. Another fake, another piece of fakery. Elaborate fakery, but not that elaborate. Now there's so much wrong with this one. Right, I barely know where to start on this. Okay. For a start, those guys have got no, it's not that clear actually on the screen, but trust me, those guys have got no protective clothing, no protective eyewear. They would have received a huge dose of gamma rays that would have blinded them. And even protective clothing wouldn't have protected them from those gamma rays, by the way, which, by the way, travel at the speed of light. So they would have hit them way before that photograph was taken. And don't forget also, this is a very interesting and important point, that gamma rays actually destroy photos and videos instantly. Very good. So that's enough of photos. There's loads more, but I won't show you them all. That's an interesting picture. What a giveaway. This is the US military studying their scripts for the fake tests at Eniwetok Atoll in 1951. Second draft script for Operation Greenhouse. Now this is actually on a US government website. Which website is it on? Can't remember now. I think it's Lookout Mountain, I think. Government installation. Now, real events don't require scripts, but apparently these tests were scripted. So there you go. This actually follows the well-known maxim that the cabal like to inflict upon us, and that is revelation of the method. Have you all heard of revelation of the method? Whereas they secretly tell us exactly what it is they're doing to us. Hiding it in plain sight, in other words. Okay. Yeah, there's so much more photographic fakery. There's a lot more in here for anybody who's interested. Falsification of science, but it's too much to cover in a short presentation. Now, changing tack slightly. Anybody seen this film, The China Syndrome? It was released on the 16th of March, 1979, and believe it or not, it was about a nuclear meltdown at a power station in America. And the title of the film comes from the fact that it was set to blow a hole right through the Earth, for all you globe lovers, all the way to China. So, yeah, this was the first ever intimation that a nuclear power plant could undergo a devastating meltdown. Before that, nothing. And the title as a film, as I say, it refers to blowing a hole all the way through to China. Bit of globist propaganda there. So just bear that in mind for a moment. By the way, there's that's Jack Lemmon. Can't remember. Jane Fonda, thank you. And somebody else. Michael Douglas. Thank you. Yeah. So yeah, it was 79. It was March 79. So just bear that in mind for a moment. And while you're all talking, I'll have a glass of cherry juice. Thank you. So yeah. Anybody know what that is? Huh? Did somebody say 3 Mile Island? Yeah. It's 3 Mile Island in Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. Does anybody remember that incident? It was saturation news coverage for weeks. Okay. Anybody know when it was? No, it was actually the 28th of March 1979. China Syndrome was released on the 16th, and 3 Mile Island happened just 12 days later. Coincidence? I will let you guys decide. So, yeah, interesting little aside. Radiation is not deadly. They have to say that it is in order to make the danger even greater. No one, not a single person in Hiroshima and Nagasaki suffered any radiation burns or from radiation sickness. And how telling is it that Hiroshima and Nagasaki were never evacuated after the so-called attacks? Indeed, as was Fukushima. That was never evacuated either after that huge meltdown in 2011. And yet Chernobyl was. And what's happening at Chernobyl right now? It's still barricaded off. Nobody's allowed to enter. Too dangerous. But yet, apparently, it's a thriving wildlife population. It's turned into a kind of a natural habitat for all sorts of different species. And now, apparently, people are moving back in surreptitiously. No, but it wouldn't be habitable for thousands of years, apparently. So, yeah, why were they never abandoned? Or Chernobyl, or Fukushima. Yeah. Now that, believe it or not, is Hiroshima the day after the nuclear attacks. And obviously those two guys there have taken every precaution you can imagine to protect themselves from all the radiation. This was the aftermath of Fukushima. It says here, the nuclear disaster at Fukushima sent an unprecedented amount of radiation into the Pacific. Rubbish. Now, here's an interesting guy. Galen Windsor. I was talking to Trevor about him earlier today. And have anybody ever heard of him? Yeah, okay, some people, yeah. Okay, now Galen's an interesting guy. He's dead now, bless him. He was well in his 80s when he died, not far off 90 actually. He worked in nuclear power plants all his life, and he absolutely insisted that radiation was totally safe. He was a whistleblower. And he also stated categorically that the 3 Mile Island disaster was a hoax, perpetrated in order to create this myth of nuclear danger. And every single morning, without fail, he went to work and he had a swim in the allegedly highly toxic reactor cooling ponds every day. Every single day. And he used to do talks all around the country, and he used to lick pure uranium on his hands as part of his lectures. Now, there are still some of his lectures on, I don't think they're on YouTube. I doubt they'd be on YouTube. They're on one of the video channels, maybe Rumble or BitChute, yeah, possibly. So if you're interested in him, look him up. It's fascinating. Yeah. So we're coming to the end now. We're not too far off. Look at the summary. We had Major Desiversky. He told us that there was no difference in either the bombing methodologies used or the actual results of the extensive carpet bombing. And no difference between the 2 atomic cities and the rest. The metal frame buildings were still intact. The few brick-built buildings were still intact. And he debunked the 100,000 dead figure. 200,000 dead figure. He reckoned between 50 and 60,000, which is about 1/8 of those who died at Dresden in 1945 after the firebombing. Close on 500,000 people died in Dresden in one night. I don't know if you're aware of that. That's something else I talk about. Yeah. So the photographic evidence of nuclear tests, as we've seen a little bit of, is all faked. And in August 1945, Japan surrendered eventually, and the world was about to live in terror or the threat of nuclear war for the next 45 years. There are no official records in Japan. Again, this is fact, not me just making stuff up to be dramatic. There are no official records in Japan or anywhere else of anyone ever dying from nuclear weapons attacks or radiation. Funnily enough, at this point, I did this presentation in Nottingham a couple of years ago, and a lady in the audience piped up. She said, "I used to live in Hiroshima, and I can tell you that that is not true." She said, and I know that the atomic blasts are real because there are walls in Hiroshima where you can see the shadows of people that have been melted into them. And I said, well, actually, it was my friend actually piped up and said it. He said, "How come the wall was still standing?" And she sat down again. And she came to see me afterwards and she said, "I think you might be right." So interesting. So yeah, the bottom line is that the two cities were destroyed by conventional weapons, be it firebombing, napalm, whatever. And military propaganda and censorship did the rest of the job for them. And of course, the beneficiaries of this hoax, for such as it is, are the usual NWO gang and their ongoing plan to totally subjugate us all. They needed a plausible excuse to promulgate the Cold War in order to keep us all in a state of abject fear. Nuclear weapons technology is allegedly a closely guarded secret. And they tell us that nuclear weapons work by compressing two solid pieces of metal together, which causes them to explode. Really. True. And there is no scientific evidence that explosive fission exists, except within highly suspect secret military documents. Now I have a little saying that I sometimes use. And that goes, scientists have discovered that people will believe absolutely anything as long as it's preceded by the words, scientists have discovered that. Yeah. And another quote by Mr. Hamer from The Falsification of Science. And he said, "To repeat for the avoidance of any doubt at all, two small metal pieces cannot become one by compressing them together. It is a scientific and physical impossibility, and another example of the indiscriminate breaking of the laws of physics. And even if they could, they would not detonate destructively. Solid metal cannot simply explode under any circumstances any more than nothing can, as in the case of the alleged Big Bang. Nuclear fission is only possible under moderated and controlled conditions by using neutrons to produce energy in the form of electricity and heat." Some pertinent questions, maybe, to ask ourselves. Nuclear bombs allegedly incinerate everything within a radius of tens of miles, so why were all the non-wooden buildings in Hiroshima and Nagasaki still standing with little structural damage afterwards? Interesting question. Why has Chernobyl remained a haven for wildlife if radiation is so deadly? And why did 3 Mile Island in Pennsylvania remain open, which it did, if it was supposedly leaking copious amounts of radioactive material for a long period and causing cancer en masse in the adjacent populations? We're also told that nuclear power plants, such as the one at San Onofre in Southern California, leaks, but beachgoers have been using the beaches right beside it for many years, and no one is known to have suffered any ill effects. Why would that be? Answers on a postcard. Indian Point in upstate New York is alleged to be leaking radioactive material into the drinking water of New York City. Why has no one reportedly died from this? So, the conclusion, very, very near the end now. It's an absolute, unquestionable, concrete fact that the USSR and the USA colluded and worked together to fake both the alleged space race, that's another story for another time, and the Cold War. Nuclear weapons don't exist, but they are a very effective, simple but effective way of controlling populations and keeping the masses in a constant state of fear and apprehension, thereby rendering us all much easier to control. And, of course, the arms race is another huge money-generating machine, just like NASA and all its fake space nonsense. The billions generated by these hoaxes are no doubt being funneled into all manner of black ops, as well as the deep pockets of the perpetrators. It's all about fear, fear, and more fear. It's the control mechanism they use to keep us in a permanent state of unease and thereby easier to control. Yeah. So whenever I do podcasts, I always get asked if I've got anything else to add, whatever, to whatever was being talked about at the time. And I always make this point: don't live in fear. There's nothing to fear but fear itself. Compartmentalise it all. Bring it out of the box when you need to look at it, when you need to research it, when you want to look at it. But otherwise, just get on with your lives. Love your family. Love your children. And don't be fearful, sorry. So, this is a apposite reminder. What can we do to stop living in fear? Click. Switch the bloody thing off. And all that you've heard from me tonight, and that is all you're going to hear from me tonight, apart from questions, will be found in that book. And here is a selection of all my other books. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is the end. You'll be pleased to hear